And Bertus, giving us some details as to what we can anticipate. And as you can see, lots of worksheets. So it does call for your creativity, for your laughter, as was a clear indicator of the participation. And of course, conversations to actually source some of those outcomes that we need to build up on. And I love how Bertus also alluded to a wish list, right? And much like your online shopping and your cart, sometimes you need a gentle reminder that, hold on, that particular item that you liked and put in your wish list, I think you should actually purchase it. And that's the challenge that I want to leave with many of you here today. Whilst we discuss these ideals about social cohesiveness, having these groups that can be set up and potential outcomes that we need to achieve, we actually need to apply this in our day-to-day activities. So I certainly hope that as you participate in the breakaway sessions, we are cognizant of making commitments to actually following through with the suggestions and ideals that we do bring forward to the table. On that note, many of you who have joined us today on the platform online, we appreciate the commentary and the feedback. And a reminder as well that if any point you happen to experience any technical disruptions, the video recordings and presentations of today's speakers will be made available to all delegates. Those of you who have been present in the room to experience them live, including those who will be watching via our online platform. Now, what's exciting to actually hear about the outcomes of the breakaway session is that we almost have the opportunity to recreate, reimagine, rethink, as we heard from one of our speakers yesterday, as to what the future of CSI looks like. So imagine if you had to put together a show reel, I guess this movie, theater, promo that would show you what CSI 3.0 looks like. What does it entail? And for many of us, we might be thinking of a number of concepts, and I'm hoping that you apply your mind to these and, of course, even share some of those suggestions with us via the chat platform here today. But to share some detail with us, not only to understand the current environment when it comes to CSI in South Africa, but also unpacking what CSI 3.0 does look like, allow me to warmly welcome the founder and managing director of Trialogue on stage for a fireside chat conversation where he'll probe his mind, evaluate what the outcomes are, and most importantly, also speak to the findings and the research that has been conducted by Trialogue that you would be able to read up on in the handbook that you received in the delegate pack yesterday. So it's some good reading and, of course, shares a lot of insight into the current environment that we're in. But to simplify it for us, amplify it as well, and of course allow us to actually restructure and consider what CSI 3.0 looks like. Allow me to welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Nick Rocky. Level 3 applause, please. You guys need to be nice, right? Because this is Nick we're speaking to. I'm teasing. Good to touch base with you, Nick, and I think great to have you on stage. Not just sharing insights with us into the podium, and I guess as a result and an outcome of the insight into the handbook, but really an opportunity to engage and really reflect on this journey that you've been on regarding the partnership that Trialogue does have with a number of its participants in the industry. But first things first, yesterday we did hear from a number of key participants and the panelists who had shared some details and insight as to how they've been impacted as NPOs regarding the level of investment and, of course, contributions from big business on the back of the last 2 years we've experienced. It's been the pandemic, we've seen the lockdown, witnessed the looting in certain parts of the country, and now also plagued by the challenges of flooding, which impacted the province of KZN. That's the big picture view of where we are. But help us actually unpack what key highlights, key insights are we witnessing regarding the current environment of CSI investment in South Africa?
No, thank you, Jan. Great to be here and just to have this conversation. I think the sector's obviously been through the mill a bit. You know, CSI is very dependent on corporate profitability. With COVID coming, profits declined. There was a lot of companies holding back. But also programs that were struggling, you know, particularly where direct contact was required. People need to get out into school. So there was a lot of introspection, programs having to shift an approach, a lot of disruptive processes in the last period. And so we've seen that. I think we're coming through that now. So if we look at our research, and I'm not going to unpack a lot of the data which is in the handbook, and a lot of the results of our research are there. But we're seeing now a trend towards companies reinvesting, coming back into wanting to, or more companies going to increase budgets going forward than those that are still suffering and declining and decreasing budgets. And this is very much in line with global practice. Trialogue's part of a network called the Global Exchange. And this is with sort of like-minded organizations across the world: Brazil, India, France, Germany, United States, very different country contexts. And we're starting to compare research and share research questions with those. So we saw very similar trends going on across the world.
Yeah.
And that's reflecting here as well.
Yeah, I think quite refreshing to hear that and understand it. What was also what stood out for me, particularly looking at some of the insights regarding social giving, is the fact that we saw an uptick in virtual volunteering. And I think that tells us something, because perhaps it even sounds like a new concept. I had to sit back for a moment and think, what is virtual volunteering? How do you do it practically? And that almost gives us a snapshot into what the future of CSI looks like. Given what we've been through and the current status quo, and of course some of the findings, help us unpack how we've, I guess, identified certain nuances and experiences that actually can be built up on in the future when it comes to reimagining or developing CSI 3.0.
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, I think, with the virtual space, just to cover that, I guess it's a bit like this conference. We went virtual, now we're going back to hybrid, so you learn how you can apply, but the value of getting art into communities is going to remain really important, I think, going forward. So yeah, I think that it'll come out the back end looking different, but still, drawing on the best of technology, but also still having physical presence. The question around 3.0, CSI 3.0, so I guess if we just go back in time, when CSI became a thing back in the early days, it was very much a grant-making type approach. The Chairman's Fund, organizations donating charitable donations to projects, and that still exists to a large extent, and there's nothing wrong with that. But and if you looked at reports in the early days, social reports, it was very much pictures of beneficiaries and projects, and descriptions of how companies had supported those projects. And then we developed what we sort of called a phase of more involvement, longer term flagship type programs, where companies would support programs for 3 to 5 years, longer periods, looking more holistically at what the intervention was going to deliver, looking at outcomes and trying to track those and measure those. Stronger alignment to the business. So technology companies investing in technology solutions, food companies investing in food solutions and the like, not only because it made sense for their business and more shared, it offered the opportunity towards a more shared value type approach.
Yes.
But because they could also provide more resources and thinking into that space. And what we're starting to see now is more complex, a more complex level of CSI, and it's coming through in the conversations, collaboration, funding research, bringing in, looking at the entire ecosystem. And that's difficult, it's complex, and it's not for everyone, to move into that space. But we're seeing companies now invest in an area, developmental area, understanding all the players in that space, and they're very different players, government players and other NPOs that are offering research into that environment, and bringing these people around a table into a particular space, looking at actually making a difference more holistically in that area. I mean, CSI funding is at best 1 or 2% of what government's spending. So on its own, it can't change the world. But where that money is applied into a thinking space and into a space that can effectively influence the way government is spending their funding in an environment. So, and we're seeing some really interesting examples starting to come through. Innovative finance, outcomes-based funding, the use of data, funding research, looking at advocacy on the back of your CSI program.
Got you.
All of this sort of more deeper thinking and deeper effort associated with trying to change a system.
Got you. I find that refreshing, Nick, and I do want to jump in because I do see that one of our speakers that had a question yesterday from a conservation environment, you'll forgive me, sir, for not recalling your name, but it does seem as though while certain businesses are taking that whole holistic approach, a more holistic approach, there are some sectors that need some guidance, that need some assistance, and perhaps also want to propel their level of CSI engagement. Are we seeing that as an organization like Trialogue, together with other stakeholders, that we're increasing that level of engagement? And perhaps even script sharing to say, well, this has worked. How about you try it in your industry? Banking, energy, SOEs, conservation. Are we seeing an increased level of engagement, perhaps?
Yeah, I think that there is that increase and that's the desire to engage. But fundamentally, people protect their space. And I think one needs to understand that. NPOs are naturally protective over their processes, their funding streams, corporates, their brand. So to get people into a room, there's a lot of, idealism and saying, yes, this is how it needs to work. But practically, when you actually go into that environment, it takes, it requires people to sort of step up and actually be prepared to share. And it's difficult, particularly when you're talking to stakeholders with very different cultures. If you're bringing the Department of Education or universities or unions around the table, they have very different agendas. It takes time and it takes patience. I'll give you an example. Trialogue's been working for about 3 years now in a process called TICSA. So we were working with the Bertha Centre down in UCT and the Joint Education Trust, JET, and really looking at how teacher internships when young teachers are initial education, so they're still going through their distance education programs and are placed in functional schools to learn and to really understand what teaching is all about. And those models exist. Now, what we're trying to do is bring those models around the table, understand the metrics, understand what's working, what's not working, understanding the economic case for that. But in the room, all the different stakeholders and a big steering committee driving that process, really with the vision of can this be adopted as an alternative pathway to teacher education. Now that we're trying to shift that whole space, but we don't know how it's going to end up. It's complicated, it's risk, and it's a collaborative process where the collaborative vehicle needs to be funded because these organizations won't naturally come together.
True.
And that's a complex example, but there are a lot more simple examples. Schooling systems around Grahamstown where they're trying to bring players around the table to really look at long-term healthy schooling in that environment. And there are many examples where this sort of high-level, I call it 3.0, CSI 3.0 processes are in play.
Yeah.
And it's really just about the level of complexity and the timeframes. If you've got a little bit of funding, I think it's absolutely fine to look at real good organizations that you can donate to. If you've got an appetite to really bring in and align programs to your work and build relationships over a longer period of time, build a relationship primarily with an implementing partner and do good work in that process.
Got you.
And if you've got an appetite for really trying to push boundaries, get into that more complex space.
I think it speaks to finding that sweet spot, the opportunities that speak to you, given the resources that you might have available, and of course the impact that you're trying to drive. And we mentioned the word impact, and I think it's been said several times within this conference, even online in the chat service. And it speaks to, I guess, some of the frustrations that a lot of corporate sponsors do have. How do we make sure that we're not just giving money away, but we see the impact? We measure and evaluate and monitor the outcomes. And I guess that must be a question that many corporates actually might struggle with as a conundrum, hence these ongoing engagements. What's your word of advice or I guess level of insight you can share for corporates to fully understand how to make their investments so much more impactful?
Yeah, I think the golden lesson is to make sure that you leave behind a positive difference at the end of the day, and think about how you're going to exit the program. What is it going to look like when you leave behind? Do you understand the developmental context that you're investing in? Because if you don't understand it, you better make sure your partner does, because otherwise you make mistakes. I mean, CSI, we're working with people's lives here, and it's a complex space. It's often the complexity of CSI, of development, is often underrated, particularly when you're working with individual lives. So 101, don't do any harm. Make sure that you don't leave people stranded Don't raise expectations and then leave them deserted.
Got you.
Stay in the course and understand that what you do and when you leave, you're going to leave. You can leave something behind when you go. Yeah.
Exactly. I do want us to shift that conversation and perhaps focus on NPOs, right? And maybe by show of hands, if we could have an indication of how many NPOs are present in the room. Well, real high. And I can imagine what some of your concerns are, right? Maintaining relationships, perhaps? Yes, no, maybe? Looking for additional funding? Yes, no, maybe? We heard a resounding yes there. There's a large number of NPOs representatives here in the room, and I can imagine they all are speaking to the various sponsors, support groups, government organizations that are present here today. But if you could share, again, some insight that you've gained in your experience with Trialogue and through Trialogue as to how best they can build up on their initiatives to maintain relationships with partners, existing, new, and ensuring that their impact is also sustainable given the outcomes that they're trying to drive.
Yeah, I mean, I think it came out in this innovation workshop, and it really is about trust and transparency. It is about building a relationship, and it's easier said than done. You know, often NPOs say, well, we can't get anyone to talk to. We send applications, corporates, and that you get stuck in their processes and that. But if you're able to get to build a relationship, those relationships can be really rewarding. And, you know, understanding that this is a development and it's a joint journey that you're on, being transparent about what's working and what's not working. And that will build trust.
That's interesting you mentioned that. Is there often a fear factor attached to actually explaining what is not working, what might not be appropriate?
We see a lot of glossing over. People really, you know, pretending it's all good, but underneath the hood, it's not as pretty as, because it's difficult. And being able to go and have a conversation with companies, say, we're really struggling here, you know, people aren't coming to the workshops because they can't get transport or whatever the case is. Having that open conversation, I think, is important.
Got you. Build trust, open conversation, and of course, making sure that you leverage off of those opportunities and be honest. I like that. When it's not all good under the hood. See what Nick did there? Nick, I guess there's a lot of engagement with Trialogue. There's also exciting opportunities that we've seen with Trialogue, specifically when it's around the Trialogue Strategic CSI Award. And I understand that there's often so much excitement around this. It not only builds up the profile of specific organizations, but also provides them with an opportunity to expand, grow, scale on some of their initiatives. Help us unpack, again, increased engagement with Trialogue, and most importantly, the Strategic CSI Award program.
Yeah, I mean, what Trialogue tries to do is to provide information that people will inform better decision making and to really stimulate the conversation. So we have a number of platforms, the handbook, the conference. We run webinars people can come into if a topic resonates with them. We welcome suggestions around topics that people want to hear more about. And then one of the concepts, and we're busy, we will be launching a training academy quite soon as well, which is, our knowledge hub is rich with information. And we would encourage people when they're making decisions around investments to understand the space and to go in and look at the resources that we put forward and make available. The award is based on the concept of shared value at a CSI level. There's a lot written about that. And this is a CSI take on that. The entries for this year are open now. Up on our website, and we will be announcing it when we launch the handbook at the end of the year. In November, we'll announce the winners of the Strategic CSI Award. We've run it for a number of years, and there's some fascinating examples of how projects can actually adopt a win-win solution. I believe that we're going to see who the winners were for last year. Is that?
I understand that, but before you give us that snapshot, and maybe we can use Unjani, the winner from last year, as an example, just to encourage and propel NPOs in the room to actually participate. What was their winning formula? The secret sauce that got them the full attention of the judges in order to win?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to how you can work with a company and tap into their resources and their networks effectively to advance the developmental interests of what you're doing. So how can you really, and what is it that's going to work for a company? We're not talking about a return on investment in financial terms, but how can they, by supporting a project, really feel good about it with their stakeholders? How can it actually inform their business processes in some sort of way? And for a health company, you know, to understand that the rural clinic space better, through the Njani project. I think there are all sorts of rewards that come back for a company that supports that in that space. Yeah.
Some good examples. They certainly won the award last year. I think just for us to really gain some insight into who they are, let's take a look at a brief video that has been put together. Pay attention to the screen, and of course, we'll watch and engage as to who Unjani is, how they won, and what the initiative does aim to drive.
In South Africa, 84% of the population are reliant on a heavily overburdened public health care system. All too often, these facilities are located long distances from people's homes. The time required to travel adds to the burden, having an impact on the individual as well as their employers. In all too many cases, patients find themselves untreated on their first visit, meaning multiple visits. In 2011, Imperial created an innovative, easily and quickly constructed community clinic system to bring quality, affordable healthcare directly into the communities where they are so desperately needed. The Unjani clinics provide an opportunity for patients to be treated quickly and effectively for all basic conditions. Owned and staffed by trained nursing professionals from the community, Unjani empowers women in business, providing easily accessible, quality, affordable healthcare together with career opportunities and community advancement. Unjani Clinics, empowering healthcare.
What a beautiful representation, right? Awesome. Nick, I think that's really given us some great encouragement to fully understand what it is that we're looking for and, of course, the impact on the community that we're also seeking. So I really think that's encouraging for many of the NPOs in the room to actively participate. And as you said, entries are open.
Yes.
Got you. Okay, well, we're excited about that. Thank you so much. Please give Nick a round of applause, everyone, for giving us some insight as to what we can look forward to. Thank you, Nick.